Hello everyone, my name is Marc Philipp. I'm a partner and managing director with Kearney's Global Healthcare and Life Sciences practice. Today we're in New York City and I would like to welcome you to our new episode of the Biopharma R&D Practitioners' Voices, an interview series with industry experts from the biopharma industry on drug research and development and strategy and transformation. And today I'm very excited to have a very special guest with us. It's Axel Wiest. Axel is special because he is a Kearney alumni. He started his career with Kearney as a strategy consultant, a physician, medical doctor by training. And after Kearney, he moved into various different roles in the biopharma industry, always around strategy and operations in research and development. First with Fresenius, then with Merck KGaA, and now with Bristol Myers Squibb. Welcome, Axel. Very excited to have you.
Thank you, Marc. Thanks for having me.
Super. Axel, if we start with a macro view on where we are today, I think one of the observations we have is that, very recently we have seen another major commitment from the US and also from China to declare the biopharma industry and healthcare overall as a strategic industry. And the commonality of these policy changes obviously is an attempt to kind of close the affordability gap and manage kind of pricing, reimbursement, access to medicine and to innovation for patients in need of medical treatment. But a lot of things are also relevant for research and development organizations. So what's your view on how all of this plays out in the R&D environment and what leaders should be looking at these days?
Yeah, thanks, Marc. Clearly, the pressure on R&D productivity is increasing, and it's not a new theme. If you put the IRA and some of the drug pricing control measures that we see in Europe, and you mentioned China as well, in perspective, we've been seeing this, also after the financial crisis. Now, lately, after the pandemic, public budgets are strained, basically, and the IRA is clearly in the US, probably for a long time, if not for the first time, one of those measures to control healthcare spending on the drug side, so on the drug pricing side. Now, when it comes to negotiated pricing, after 9 years for small molecules, it seemingly puts small molecules to a disadvantage. Now, science doesn't play out that you only can do large molecules. We all know that. Druggable targets are not choosing the molecule. It's the other way around. So in other words, that while it might be a disadvantage for small molecules, let's see how that plays out. Another way, what I would say, and again, IRA and the implications are shaping up, and there's much more to be seen. But another potential disadvantage that we could see is for life cycle management and indications later down the road. So that means that we might want to look into more parallel investments. Another way also to look at, we need to come up with even more innovative first-in-class medicine. So if you combine all that, parallel investments, even more innovative targets and innovative, drugs, mode of actions, you have probably a little bit more risk, even more risk in your portfolio and pipeline than before. So bottom line, it's what we do, innovative medicines, we need to do even better, and we need to, and that's the other aspect, operational excellence, we need to do it even faster, bring medicines to patients even faster. So there's more room for improvement on both sides, become even more innovative.
Great. So the pressure, in other words, is rising, right? So there's higher need for being faster and doing more kind of development
Absolutely.
With similar funding and similar limited resources. But if we compare this now also to kind of previous traditional R&D operating models and the way R&D thinks about this, R&D used to do a lot of effort to get over the market authorization hump. and then the commercial folks would pick it up, and then market access would look at this and say, okay, what's the best price point? How can we provide access to the biggest patient population as fast as possible? How is that shifting now in light of IRA already, or the pricing regimes already influencing drug development strategies? Is there something that you observe from a model perspective?
Yes, there's clearly a need, what we call, to approach drug development with an end-to-end mindset. Mm-hmm. So you really need to have the end result, not only approval, but also obviously reimbursement, access, pricing in mind. That starts as early as around drug candidate selection, where you really want to have a good understanding, or start to have an understanding around your target product profile, where you when investment starts into preclinical development, CMC, product development, you want to have a good you want to have your commercial colleagues at the table when it's about the right formulation. Mm-hmm. Early on. That saves you a lot of time later on in the clinical phase. Mm-hmm. If you then start to switch from, let's say, sub-Q, from IV to sub-Q, that's really too late. That costs money and time, actually. So you really want to have global teams and development teams early on that have the end game in mind. And that's at the team level as well as at the governance level. Same story.
So in other words, probably even more complexity and probably even more interdisciplinary collaboration required across the whole life cycle of drug discovery and development, right?
Absolutely. That for me is one of the critical success factors. And I would argue it starts at the team level, at the development, preclinical, early development, late development team level. That's where the value gets generated. You also, at the steering level or at the governance level, you need to have that mindset. But the value generation takes place at the team level. Drug development is a business with a lot of failures and very few successes, and very, very complex exercise, having all the various steps in a regulated environment to bring the right expertise to the right discussion at the right time.
So as a global leader in strategy and planning in R&D, I think one of the jobs, probably part of your job description, is to acknowledge this complexity, but also try to somewhat cope with it and manage it and help organizations to drive this, despite the need to translate and have translational science being really a mindset and not only a function, and having interdisciplinary teams. So if we add to this increased translational complexity, the increased complexity of new science, new modalities, cell and gene, very different types of assets, different types of development strategies required to be successful, is there any kind of perspective on how you try to reconfigure and simplify this? So when we think about different ways to get to market, is it one size fits all? Is it every asset gets his, every asset team has the freedom to define his or her own destiny, or is there anything in between?
It's probably, the short answer is there's something in between. So obviously, you mentioned cell therapy. Cell therapy by itself has a lot of exceptional requirements that you wouldn't see for other modalities, let's say large molecules or small molecules. So that's probably a different kind. Still, following some clinical trial regulations, and so these external regulations are the same. But in terms of specific needs, the process is the product. You need to be much closer intertwined with your colleagues from product development, for instance, as an example. Patient numbers are much smaller, etc. So clearly, from a modality perspective, there are differences, yes. But also from when you look at from a portfolio perspective, you cannot develop your portfolio, all projects at the same time with high priority, with speed, etc. You need to differentiate. Mm-hmm. So what I've seen working really well, if you have 3 different priority categories. High priority being obviously your value drivers. You can't have too many value drivers and too many high priorities, because obviously then it doesn't really make a difference. Let's say, 15, 20% of your portfolio on that high portfolio. That's where you put your best people, your resources, financial, but also FTEs, your employees. You basically front load activities at risk. You basically pave the way for the team to deliver and to do their job. So that's in the high priority one. Then you have a large bucket of core, or medium priority, whatever you want to call it. Simple. There you have a little bit more differentiated approach. You don't front load everything. You backload some activities. And then there's a category where whether you call it category C or low priority or clarify, that's definitely a category where you only do activities to pressure test and basically, some call it do killer experiments, basically where a project, you have some gray data and you want to pressure test, and then either it's back in the medium priority or even high priority, or you terminate.
Okay, so there is a differentiation according to importance, relevant, resource priorities, etc.
Absolutely.
What we've seen is there's probably also different categories with respect to what are you optimizing for, right? Are you optimizing for speed?
Yes.
Is it a kind of a fast track approach? Are you optimizing for head-to-head evidence to create the and superior benefit risk profile versus competition?
Absolutely. I mean, you're touching on what we call the magic triangle, and that's not specific to our industry, but obviously R&D projects need to be managed in the magic triangle, managing speed, cost, quality. The flip side of quality is risk. And it's about the right balance. It's relatively straightforward and easy, quote unquote, easy to manage projects on speed. Chances are that you mess up on the quality side or even on the budget side are high.
Now, I know that you personally have been sitting in important R&D governance committees for quite a long time and have seen how these decisions are made, how portfolios are discussed, and individual assets kind of progress is reviewed and clinical readout are discussed. So in light of this new kind of need for more translational end-to-end perspective, we sometimes see that this is still not necessarily reflected in how these conversations are going and how the mindset of the people in these conversations are, right? Because everyone wants to defend his or her own asset and baby and pet project. There are experts on the table who have very deep multi-year expertise in one of the, forgive my wording, silos, rather than thinking broadly, holistically. How do you overcome this in practice? Is there any magic trick that you can recommend or that you've seen work?
So at the team level, one way to do it, not the only way, but one way is obviously you have shared team objectives. So as part of your, the majority of your personal objectives should be actually the team objectives. And with all good teams, sports teams, a good team is more than the sum of its members, and that's where, and team objectives help. Obviously, a good leader helps as well to bring the best, to get the best out of the team. From a governance perspective, team empowerment really is important. You want to get out of the way, what I mentioned earlier, processes as much as needed to help the team rather than to stifle the teams.
Very good.
Even in late development. From a leader perspective, same story. I mean, you need to act as role model. If you just have your, what you call silo, rightly so, your vertical silo in mind and just think as a functional expert or subject matter expert, that's not sufficient. That's necessary, but not sufficient. You need to be able to zoom in and out, basically, and have the broader perspective, put yourself into the shoes of the one that is on the receiving end. So we talked about market access pricing. R&D leaders need to have our, market access pricing in mind and need to keep that in mind. And that starts with the comparator, selection of the comparator, for instance, or having outcomes research, as part of your overall clinical development plan. So that's kind of what we call an integrated approach. The project teams or program teams, asset teams, they usually lay it out in what we call a strategy development plan or an integrated development plan, where all these aspects, functional plans, come basically in, and so that the sum is more than, or the overall plan is more than the sum of its parts.
Perfect. Regardless of this attempt to bring everyone together, we probably both acknowledge differences between discovery and development. How would you characterize this, and how do you think these differences should be taken into consideration when building the optimal model around it?
Yeah, I mean, in short, in discovery, in the research space, it's all about the science. And of course, in a bigger company, the research strategy should align with the overall company strategy, your TA footprint, therapeutic area footprint. It should align with your modality and technology footprint. So for instance, ADC, you wouldn't do any research if you didn't have any manufacturing and product development capabilities. This has downstream consequence. So that needs to be aligned with your overall corporate and company strategy. Other than that, you need to let the scientists and the science basically let the science play out. And self-governance works as long as you agree on and align on the overall objective. In the preclinical and early clinical stage, that's where you operate more and more in a regulated environment that starts with animal welfare, that of course GXP on the GMP and GCP, for instance, or GLP. That's the phase where you generate the data that really inform your overall assets strategy. When it comes, what we discussed earlier, also, that's when commercial comes in, and to develop a target product profile together with the R&D colleagues, etc. So that's where it's shifting, and still room for serendipity, for unexpected findings, absolutely. But you move more and more into, from exploratory to confirming, and there's a transition. The more signals you see, the more hopeful signals and positive signals, the more you go into execution. And late development, it's all about execution, of course, executing a strategy based on your preclinical, early clinical findings.
So we talked about kind of the commonalities across the value chain and the need to further integrate end to end. We talked about the differences between discovery and development. So the typical third dimension that we haven't yet talked about is the geographic dimension. As a global R&D person, you probably reflect a little bit on US versus Europe versus, and then Asia Pacific, China, Japan, and emerging markets. As we see also these Asian markets and emerging markets becoming more relevant from a commercial attractiveness perspective, a lot of R&D leaders are also looking at this from an R&D perspective, saying how should we treat Japan? How should we treat China? To what extent do we need to be present there? What role do these geographies and markets play for our part of the value chain? What's your perspective on those markets, and where do you see them today and tomorrow?
So you touched on China and Japan, and China. Both markets are number 2 and number 3, respectively, in global scale. And China, not only the economy, but also from a healthcare market or pharma market perspective, is aspiring to become number 1. So you, as an R&D organization, now you need to have your boots on the ground. So very clearly, these are not only from a commercial perspective, but also from an R&D perspective. From a regulation perspective, this has been supported. So meaning, let's take China for an example. Until probably 2015, in China, you had to go through a normal phase 1, a phase 2, and a phase 3, separate from your global program, from your global development. China changed, the Chinese agency, they changed their regulations so that we now can add, after a PK study, Chinese patients only, then we can add Chinese patients to our global phase 3 programs. So somewhere 15 plus minus % Chinese patients added to a global phase 3. That offers you, plus the PK study that I mentioned earlier, offers you to apply for and submit your dossier, Chinese dossier, global dossier, supported by the global dossier, and then to get registration in China.
So it's almost a booster to global studies then?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One, it's much easier now for multinationals to go to China and to develop your drugs also for the Chinese markets. Number one. Number two, your point, absolutely. It's also a booster for your global programs. And also another one that global players don't want to miss out is, of course, both for China and Japan, but more recently for China, to tap into the local research and science hubs, so to say, as they further evolve. China overall, big picture, moving from a workbench, away from the workbench perspective into innovation and science. So we've been seeing that as well. I mean, if you look at the number of scientific institutions that are ranking on the Nature top 200 list, China is number 2, after the US, of course. So clearly, it's a booster. It's the doors are more open than before when it comes to developing drugs for the Chinese market, and there's some innovation that you at some point as a global player want to tap into.
From a headcount and a talent perspective, if you would want to contrast kind of what part of what activity set you could perform or you could foresee performing in China versus in Japan versus maybe in India, which is also a very interesting geography in many aspects. Where do you see the trends are going, and also from what your own organization is doing right now?
Well, I mean, from a headcount, from a resourcing perspective, it's not that different compared to what you would do for the same book of work or similar book of work, what you would do, let's say, in Europe or in the US.
Any thoughts on India as a contrast?
We, as many other companies, of course, are moving now also to India from a talent perspective. So not only related to operations, but across all various, across the value chain, from research, discovery activities, preclinical activities, and then drug development, late development, operations, regulatory operations, safety, etc. So we clearly see talents in India that would help us. Also, from another aspect is not only the talent aspect, but the work, following the sun model that clearly helps as a global player. So from that perspective, we, as many other global players, have set our sails regarding India. From a clinical trial perspective, I'm sure that will follow, although we haven't seen a lot of activities yet.
Perfect. Super. Wonderful. So we touched a lot of topics, I guess, really around bringing the value chain closer together, breaking up silos, integrating, looking at differences, but also geographic trends. Thanks a lot, Axel, that you've been there. Wonderful to talk to you, and happy to see you again.
Thank you very much, Marc.
Thank you.